Welcome to Midnight Archives, a place where we drift through forgotten histories, ancient mysteries, quiet conspiracies, and stories buried beneath time itself. Tonight's journey takes us beyond the visible world, beyond the familiar story of creation, beyond the heavens of ordinary religion, into one of the strangest and most beautiful myths of the ancient world, the story of Sophia, wisdom, the fallen light, the mother of the world below. This episode also begins a deeper journey. Over the next few weeks, we will be opening the Gnostic archives, moving slowly through the hidden world of Sophia, the Demiurge, the Archons, the divine spark, the Pleroma, the lost Gospels, and the ancient question at the heart of Gnosticism, whether human beings are truly awake inside the world or only dreaming within it. Before we begin, if you enjoy slow atmospheric stories designed for curious minds and restless nights, please consider subscribing to the archive. Leave a comment below telling us where in the world you're listening from, what time it is there tonight, and which mystery, conspiracy, lost text, or forgotten story you would like us to explore next. There is something strangely comforting about knowing that people in distant rooms, in distant cities, under different skies, are listening to the same story tonight. Dim the lights, get comfortable, let the day loosen its grip. This is Midnight Archives. Tonight, we open the archive of Sophia. The story begins with a problem, not a problem of history exactly, not a problem of archaeology, not a problem that can be solved with a shovel, a carbon date, a broken manuscript, or a fragment of ancient pottery. It begins with a spiritual question. Why does the world feel broken? Why does human life contain so much beauty and so much confusion? Why do people seem to carry something luminous inside themselves, while living in a world that so often feels heavy, forgetful, and asleep? For most religious traditions, creation begins with order. A god speaks. Light appears. The world unfolds. The heavens are made. The earth is shaped. Human beings are placed within it. But for many Gnostic thinkers, especially those whose texts were buried, lost, condemned, copied, hidden, and rediscovered centuries later, the visible world was not the beginning of the story. It was the result of a disturbance, a mistake, a longing, a fall. To understand Sophia, we must enter a world of symbols, a world where divine beings are not characters in the ordinary sense, but qualities of the sacred imagination. Silence, depth, mind, truth, life, grace, wisdom. These are not simply ideas. In the Gnostic mythic world, they become living realities. They emanate from an unknowable source. They arrange themselves like lights around a mystery too bright to be seen directly. That source is sometimes called the monad, the one, the invisible spirit, the father, the depth, bythos. But every name fails, because the highest god in many Gnostic systems is not a ruler sitting above the clouds, not a king, not a judge, not a craftsman shaping matter with his hands. The highest god is beyond image, beyond gender, beyond thought, beyond being, at least as we understand being. A silence so complete that even calling it silence says too much. From this hidden source, according to the myth, there unfolds a divine fullness, the Pleroma, the fullness, a realm of light, harmony, and completeness, not heaven as a place with streets and gates, something subtler, a living wholeness, a reality where every divine quality exists in relation, balance, and reflection. Within the Pleroma are the Aeons, emanations of the hidden god. Some Gnostic texts describe them in pairs, sometimes called syzygies, male and female, thought and life, depth and silence, mind and truth, word and life, not male and female as ordinary human bodies, but as symbolic polarities, each one completing the other, each one held in balance, and among the aeons, near the furthest edge of the fullness, there is Sophia, wisdom. She is luminous, beautiful, restless. She is not evil. She is not wicked. She is not a villain. That matters. Sophia's story is not the story of simple disobedience. It is the story of longing, the desire to know the unknowable, the desire to reach beyond the boundary, the desire to create, to understand, to touch the source directly. Sophia looks toward the invisible depth from which all things came. She longs for it, not from pride alone, not from rebellion alone, but from a kind of sacred homesickness, a longing so intense that it becomes dangerous. In some versions of the myth, Sophia attempts to generate without her partner, without her syzygy, without the balance that sustains the Pleroma. In other versions, she tries to know the hidden source directly, to pass beyond the limit of what can be known. The details change across texts and traditions, but the shape remains. Sophia reaches, something trembles, the harmony of the Pleroma is disturbed, and from that disturbance, something is born outside the fullness. Not a perfect emanation, not a divine aeon, something incomplete, something ignorant, something powerful but blind, the Demiurge. In some texts, a name that sounds strange in the mouth, Yaldabaoth. He does not know the Pleroma. He does not know the hidden source. He does not know his mother clearly. He awakens in a lower region, outside the fullness of light, and believes he is alone. This is the beginning of one of Gnosticism's most unsettling ideas. The visible world, the world of matter, power, fear, law, birth, death, hunger, and empire, may not have been made by the highest God. It may have been shaped by a lesser creator, a blind craftsman, a ruler who mistook his ignorance for sovereignty. The Demiurge looks into the emptiness around him. He sees no one above him. He hears no voice beyond his own. So he declares, "I am God and there is no other." But in the Gnostic imagination, this declaration is not divine truth. It is cosmic ignorance. A child in darkness mistaking the room for the universe. Sophia sees what has happened. She sees the being born from her error. She sees the lower world beginning to take shape. She sees light falling into matter. And she grieves. Not because creation is entirely hateful, not because the world contains no beauty, but because something precious has become trapped in a realm that does not understand it. A spark of the higher light becomes enclosed in human beings, hidden inside flesh, hidden inside memory, hidden inside longing. This is why, in Gnostic myth, human beings are strange. We are not merely creatures of earth. We are not merely bodies made to obey the rulers of the lower world. We carry something that does not belong entirely here, something from before the world, something that remembers without knowing what it remembers, a homesickness without a visible home. This is the Gnostic wound, and also the Gnostic hope, because if the spark is inside us, then the way out is not only above, it is within. For many centuries, stories like this survived only in fragments. They were attacked by church fathers, summarized by opponents, condemned as heresy, mocked, feared, misquoted, preserved accidentally by the very people who wanted to defeat them. The word Gnostic comes from gnosis, knowledge, but not ordinary knowledge, not information, not facts collected in the mind. Gnosis is direct knowing, recognition, awakening. The moment a person realizes that the world is not what it appeared to be, and neither are they. Many ancient Christian writers opposed Gnostic groups because their teachings seemed dangerous, too secretive, too speculative, too dismissive of the material world, too willing to reinterpret scripture, too willing to say that the creator described by ordinary religion was not the highest God. For orthodox leaders trying to build stable communities, shared doctrine, bishops, ritual order, and unified belief, Gnostic myths could feel like fire in dry grass. They loosened the structure. They suggested that authority outside the self might be inferior to hidden knowledge within. They turned the biblical story sideways. In some Gnostic readings, the serpent in Eden was not simply a deceiver. The serpent could be a revealer. The being who encouraged Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge was not necessarily the enemy of humanity. The true enemy might be the ruler who wanted human beings to remain ignorant. That is not a small reinterpretation. It changes everything. The garden becomes a prison. The command becomes a restriction. Knowledge becomes liberation. The creator becomes suspect. No wonder such ideas were dangerous. For centuries, most of what was known about Gnostic thought came through those who opposed it. Then, in the 20th century, near the cliffs of Upper Egypt, a discovery changed everything. In 1945, near Nag Hammadi, a collection of ancient codices was found. Coptic books, hidden in a jar, buried in the desert. Inside were texts that had been lost for more than 1,000 years. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Apocryphon of John, the Hypostasis of the Archons, the Thunder, Perfect Mind, the Gospel of Truth, and many others. Not all of them were Gnostic in the same way. Not all belonged to one group. Gnosticism was never one clean, unified church. It was a family of myths, movements, teachers, schools of rituals and interpretations. But the Nag Hammadi library gave modern readers something extraordinary. It allowed the condemned voices to speak more directly. Not through their enemies only, through their own strange, luminous, difficult texts. And among the figures who returned through those pages, Sophia stood out. Wisdom, fallen and grieving, mother and exile, cause of the rupture, agent of return. She appears differently across traditions, sometimes as the final aeon, sometimes divided into higher and lower forms, sometimes called Achamoth in Valentinian systems, sometimes connected to the world's soul, sometimes redeemed through Christ, sometimes still waiting, still working, still calling the sparks of light back home. There is no single Sophia myth. There are versions, echoes, fragments, retellings, contradictions. This is important, because tonight's story is not a claim that every Gnostic group believed precisely the same thing. They did not. Tonight's story is a woven retelling, a Midnight Archives version, faithful to the mythic pattern, but shaped as a dream for the night. To help us move through it, we will follow someone else, a fictional scholar, a woman named Mira. She is not a real historical figure. She is a lantern inside the archive, a way of walking through the old texts without pretending we can reconstruct every lost voice. Mira first encountered Sophia in a basement reading room, not in a temple, not in a vision, not beneath a desert moon, but under fluorescent lights, beside a radiator that clicked every few minutes, in a university library where the air smelled faintly of dust, paper, and old glue. She was 28, a doctoral student in late antique religion, tired, underfunded, quietly angry in the way intelligent people sometimes become when they have spent too long explaining themselves to people who do not really listen. Her research was supposed to be narrow, a study of feminine divine imagery in early Christian and Gnostic texts. Precise, defensible, professional. She had promised her supervisor she would not drift into grand theories. No sweeping claims about suppressed goddess traditions, no dramatic talk of forbidden knowledge, no speculative documentaries, no mystical autobiography disguised as scholarship. Mira agreed. She liked discipline. She liked footnotes. She liked the clean humility of saying, "We do not know." But Sophia troubled that discipline. Not at first. At first, Sophia was only a figure in a text, a mythic name, wisdom, one more topic in a stack of articles. Mira read about the Pleroma, the Aeons, the Demiurge, the Archons, the divine spark. She took notes, she translated terms, She compared versions. She underlined cautiously. Then, one winter evening, while reading a damaged passage from a Gnostic text in translation, she came across a sentence that seemed to open beneath her. Not all falls are punishments. Some are descents of wisdom. The line was not part of the ancient manuscript. It appeared in the margin of an old printed edition, written in pencil by some previous reader. Probably a student, probably decades ago. No signature, no date, just that sentence. Not all falls are punishments. Some are descents of wisdom. Mira stared at it longer than she should have. Outside, rain moved against the high basement windows. The university above her had mostly emptied. Somewhere in the stacks, a door closed softly. She wrote the line into her notebook, then immediately crossed it out. Too poetic, too much, not scholarship. Still, she did not forget it. That night, Sophia entered her dreams. In the dream, there was no earth, no sky, no stars, no water, no bodies, no before or after. There was only light, but even that word was wrong. It was not light shining on something. There was nothing for it to shine on. It was light as presence, light as thought, light as being. Mira stood nowhere, watching nothing, and yet she understood that she was at the edge of the Pleroma. The fullness. Not a place exactly, more like a condition of perfect relation. Nothing was alone there. Everything answered everything else. No voice rose without an echo. No movement occurred without harmony. No desire moved without being known. Mira sensed the aeons as shapes of radiance, not bodies, not angels with wings, not gods in robes, more like living qualities, mind, truth, word, life, silence, depth, grace, memory, each one distinct, each one inseparable from the others. They moved without moving, they spoke without sound. They existed in pairs, but the pairs were not separations. They were mirrors, breathing toward one another, completing one another, holding the fullness in balance. At the edge of this luminous order, Mira saw Sophia. She knew her immediately, not because Sophia had a face, she did not, not because anyone named her. No one spoke. Mira knew her because Sophia felt like the ache inside all questions, the intelligence that cannot stop reaching, the part of the soul that hears silence and asks what lies behind it. Sophia stood near the boundary of the fullness, if standing was the word. Below her, or beyond her, or outside her, there was no darkness yet, only an unformed absence, a space that was not a space, a possibility without shape. Sophia turned toward the hidden source, the monad, the invisible spirit, the depth from which even the aeons came. In the Pleroma, all things knew the source through emanation, through harmony, through being held inside the fullness. But Sophia wanted more. She wanted to know the source directly, not reflected through the order of aeons, not held through balance, not received through her pair, directly, completely, alone. Mira felt the danger before anything happened. It was not the danger of evil, it was the danger of too much desire concentrated in one point. Sophia's longing gathered around her like a storm made of light. The other aeons seemed to pause. The fullness did not break, but something in it tightened. Sophia reached. There are moments in myth when a gesture contains an entire universe. A hand raised, a word spoken, a glance backward, a fruit taken, a door opened. Sophia's reaching was one of those gestures. She did not hate the fullness. She did not reject the light. She was made of it. But she wanted to understand the hidden root from which it came. She wanted to bring forth something from herself, as the source had brought forth the aeons. She wanted to create, to know, to become wise enough to touch wisdom's origin. And in that moment, because she reached without balance, without her partner, without the harmony that had held all emanations in order. Her desire produced something outside the fullness. A ripple passed through the Pleroma. No sound, no explosion, and no thunder, only a subtle withdrawal, as if light itself had inhaled sharply. Sophia looked down. Below her, in the unformed absence, something moved. It was not beautiful. It was not complete. It was not evil yet. Only unfinished. A being without knowledge of its own origin. A face without memory. A power without wisdom. Sophia recoiled. The thing below her stirred. It sensed itself. Then, because it had no vision of anything above, it believed itself alone. Mira felt the horror of that loneliness. A creature born from divine longing, but separated from divine memory. A child of wisdom, unable to recognize wisdom. The being opened its eyes. In some traditions, this being is described as lion-faced, serpent-bodied, shining and monstrous. In others, the details shift, but in Mira's dream, it had no fixed form. It changed whenever she tried to see it clearly. Now animal, now infant, now king, now shadow, now craftsman, now blind star. It looked into the emptiness and spoke. I am God. There is no other. The words did not echo upward. They fell. They fell into the lower emptiness and became structure. The first boundary, the first enclosure, the first false certainty. Sophia reached toward him, but the distance had already appeared. Not distance in space, distance in knowledge. He could not see her. He could not understand the realm above him. Her light touched him, but he mistook it for his own. Mira watched Sophia bend with grief. It was not theatrical grief. No scream, no collapse, only the unbearable stillness of one who has made something she cannot unmake. Below, the Demiurge began to shape. He did not create from nothing. That was part of the tragedy. He shaped from what had fallen. Fragments, reflections, distorted echoes of the Pleroma. He arranged them into spheres, heavens, powers, hierarchies. He made rulers, Archons, authorities of the lower world, each one a copy without understanding, a guard outside a palace it had never entered. The lower heavens formed around him like rings, the Konoma, the emptiness, a realm of lack, not absolute darkness, not pure evil. Something sadder, a world made from memory without comprehension, from light without wisdom, from power without love. Mira saw stars appear, cold fires turning in the lower dark. She saw earth gather, waters divide, mountains rise, animals breathe, plants unfold, bodies awaken, and there was beauty. That troubled her. Even in the dream, she noticed it. The world below was not ugly. It shimmered. The first rivers moved like silver threads. The first trees lifted themselves toward light they did not understand. The first animals opened their eyes in morning. There was tenderness in the world. There was pattern. There was music. But everything was impermanent. Every living thing trembled with loss before it even knew what loss was. To be born here was also to begin leaving. The Demiurge looked upon his work and loved it with the possessive love of one who believes he owns what he has made. He set his Archons over the spheres. He established laws. He made bodies. He made cycles. He made fear. He made hunger. He made authority. Then he shaped a human being from the lower elements, a creature of clay, a creature made to move within his world. But the body lay still. The Archons gathered. They breathed. They commanded. They called. Nothing. The figure did not rise. Because life, true life, could not come from ignorance alone. Far above or deep within, Sophia watched. She understood that the light which had fallen through her grief still waited to be gathered. So she did something the Demiurge could not understand. She hid light inside the human creature, a spark, a fragment of the Pleroma, small enough not to be recognized by the rulers, strong enough never to be destroyed. The body stirred. The human opened its eyes, and for one brief moment, before fear, before language, before law, before forgetting, the human remembered the fullness. The Demiurge saw the light in the creature and became afraid, because the thing he had made now contained something older than him, something higher, something he could command but not comprehend. So he wrapped the human in sleep. Not sleep like night, sleep like false identity. "You are only clay," he whispered. "You are only body. You are hunger. You are shame. You are obedience. You are mine." But beneath those words, deep inside the human being, the spark remained. Quiet, patient, waiting for the voice that would one day call it by its true name. Mira woke before dawn. Her room was grey. The radiator clicked softly. Rain still moved against the window. For a few seconds, she did not know where she was. Then the world returned. The desk, the books, the cup with cold tea, the stack of articles, the notebook, the crossed-out sentence. Not all falls are punishments. Some are descents of wisdom. Mira sat up slowly. She knew it had been a dream. Only a dream. The mind arranging symbols after too much reading. A scholar's fatigue. A private mythology of stress and ambition. But still, on the edge of waking, she felt something she could not dismiss. Not belief, not proof, recognition. As if the story of Sophia had not entered her from outside, but had uncovered a shape already waiting within her. The next morning, Mira returned to the library earlier than usual. Outside, the campus was still wet from the night's rain. Students crossed the courtyard with hoods pulled low, coffee cups in hand, their faces pale in the winter light. Everything looked ordinary. That was the unsettling part. The world rarely announces when something has shifted. No bell rings. No door opens by itself. You simply wake with a thought that will not leave you. Mira told herself she was being foolish. She had read too late. She had dreamed in the language of her research. That was all. Still, she went directly to the basement reading room. The same table, the same lamp, the same stack of books, the same old printed edition with the penciled note in the margin. Not all falls are punishments. Some are descents of wisdom. She opened her notebook and copied the sentence again. This time, she did not cross it out. Then she began to trace Sophia more carefully. Not Sophia as an idea, Sophia as a pattern. In the Apocryphon of John, the myth unfolds with strange precision. The invisible spirit, the emanations, the divine realms, the final aeon, the desire that acts without consent, the birth of the ignorant ruler, the creation of the lower world, the trapping of light inside human beings. In Valentinian versions, the story becomes subtler, almost psychological. Sophia's disturbance produces lack. Her longing generates imbalance. The lower world becomes a consequence of desire, error, and restoration. In the Pistis Sophia, the figure of Sophia appears again, suffering, repenting, singing hymns, longing for the light she has lost. Not the same story exactly, but the same ache, fall, separation, longing, memory, return. Mira arranged the texts across the table, different centuries, different communities, and different theological systems. Yet Sophia kept appearing at the threshold, between fullness and emptiness, between divine order and material confusion, between ignorance and awakening. She belonged to the border. That was what Mira wrote first. Sophia is a threshold figure. Then she paused. Too neat. She drew a line through it. Sophia is not a doctrine only. Another pause. Still too broad. Finally, she wrote, Sophia is what happens when wisdom becomes lonely. The sentence embarrassed her immediately. It was not academic. It would never survive peer review. But it felt closer to the truth of the myth than anything else she had written that morning. Around noon, her supervisor arrived, Professor Adrian Vale, a careful man, kind in the way exhausted scholars sometimes are kind, not warm exactly, but fair. He had spent 30 years studying early Christian texts and had developed a suspicion of beautiful explanations. Beautiful explanations, he often said, were usually where mistakes entered. He found Mira surrounded by books, her hair pinned badly, her coffee untouched. "You look dangerous," he said. Mira looked up. "That bad?" "That interested." He sat across from her and glanced at the open pages. Sophia again. Always Sophia. That is how obsessions begin. It is not an obsession. Good. Then you can explain it plainly. Mira leaned back. She is not just a fallen figure. She is the emotional center of the myth. The Demiurge explains the world. The Archons explain oppression. The spark explains human dignity. But Sophia explains why any of it matters. Vale watched her. Go on. Mira chose her words carefully. If the myth were only about an ignorant creator, it would be bleak. If it were only about cosmic rulers, it would be paranoia. If it were only about escaping matter, it would become contempt for life. But Sophia changes it, because the mistake begins in longing, not malice, and the hope begins in grief, not conquest. Vale was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That is good." Mira felt a small lift of relief. Then he added, "It is also dangerous." There it was. The sentence every young scholar learns to expect. Dangerous. Not morally dangerous necessarily. Professionally dangerous. Methodologically dangerous. Dangerous because it was too compelling. Because it might carry her faster than the evidence allowed. Professor Vale took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. You can write about the function of Sophia in Gnostic myth. You can compare textual traditions. You can analyze cosmology, anthropology, soteriology. But be careful not to make Sophia into a mirror for modern feelings. Mira looked down at her notes. What if the ancient myth is already doing that? Vale smiled faintly. Then you must show it patiently, not declare it beautifully. He stood to leave, then stopped beside the table. And one more thing. Yes? Do not use the word suppressed unless you can prove who suppressed what, when, and why. Mira almost laughed. I was not going to. Everyone says that before they do. After he left, the basement seemed quieter. Mira looked again at the marginal sentence. Not all falls are punishments. Some are descents of wisdom. She turned the old book toward the light. The handwriting was delicate, not recent. The pencil had faded to silver grey. She wondered who had written it. A bored student? A priest? A scholar? A mystic? Someone lonely? Someone who had also sat in this room, under this same bad light, feeling the ancient story come too close? She checked the library record. The book had entered the collection in 1978. Before that, it had belonged to a private donor. The name was handwritten on the inside cover. Eleanor Voss. Mira copied it. Then, without knowing exactly why, she began to search. At first, Eleanor Voss appeared to be no one. Not famous, not cited, not part of the usual scholarly conversation. Her name did not appear in major bibliographies. No books, no obvious articles, no conference papers. Only a few traces. A university appointment from the late 1960s. A translation project that seemed never to have been completed. A short obituary in a regional newspaper. A reference in an archive catalogue to donated papers. And one photograph, black and white. A woman in her early 40s, standing beside a table covered in manuscripts. Dark hair pinned back, plain dress, intense eyes. The caption read, Dr. Eleanor Voss, Department of Religious Studies, 1971. Mira stared at the image. There was nothing mystical about it. No secret society, no dramatic symbol in the background. Only a tired academic standing beside too much paper. But Mira felt an immediate sympathy. The look on Eleanor's face was familiar. It was the expression of someone who had spent too long listening to old voices and had begun to suspect they were not finished speaking. The archive that held Eleanor's papers was not far away. 2 hours by train. Mira requested access without telling Professor Vale. That was not forbidden. Not exactly. But she knew he would ask why, and she did not yet have an answer that would sound sensible. 3 days later, she arrived at a small regional archive attached to an old theological college. The building stood at the edge of a grey town, beside a churchyard where the stones had softened with weather. Inside, the archive smelled of wool coats, polished wood, and dust warmed by radiators. A clerk brought her 2 boxes, Voss, Eleanor, personal papers, restricted only by fragility. Mira opened the first box carefully. Letters, lecture notes, draft translations, photocopies, index cards, receipts, a postcard from Cairo, several pages on Proverbs where wisdom speaks as though she stood beside God before the world began, several more on Philo of Alexandria, notes on feminine divine imagery. Then, in a folder marked simply Sophia, Mira found the sentence again. Not all falls are punishments. Some are descents of wisdom. Only this time it was not in a margin. It was typed at the top of a page. Beneath it, Eleanor had written, "The question is whether Sophia falls because she fails, or whether the myth preserves an older memory of divine descent into fragmentation." Mira read the line twice, then a third time. It was more careful than the marginal note, more academic, but also stranger, an older memory. What did that mean? She turned the page. Eleanor had outlined several versions of the Sophia myth, the secret book of John. Valentinian accounts preserved through hostile sources. Pistis Sophia, the excerpts of Theodotus, fragments, paraphrases, contradictions. Beside each version, Eleanor had marked 3 recurring elements. Separation, suffering, transmission of light, not punishment, not simply error, transmission. Mira wrote the word down. The archive clock ticked softly behind her. Outside, rain began again. Eleanor's notes became less formal as the folder continued. Some pages were carefully typed, others handwritten, others only scraps. One note said, "If wisdom remains above, the world is abandoned. If wisdom descends, the world becomes dangerous but redeemable." Another said, "The myth does not hate matter. It mourns matter without memory." Mira stopped at that. The phrase seemed to settle into the room. Matter without memory. That was the lower world in a single line. Not evil substance, not dirty flesh, not creation as garbage. Something more tragic. A world cut off from the knowledge of its origin. A beautiful thing that had forgotten where its beauty came from. Mira continued. In another folder, she found correspondence between Eleanor and an unnamed colleague. Only Eleanor's side of the letters had been preserved. The responses were missing. "Dear M," she wrote in one, "I understand your objection. I am not suggesting that the Sophia myth records an event in any historical sense. I am suggesting that myth can preserve a structure of experience more accurately than doctrine preserves a statement of belief." In another, "You say I am romanticizing exile. Perhaps. But is the tradition not already doing this? The soul is not merely trapped. It is called. The prison contains a message from outside the prison. That is the entire drama." Mira turned the page. The next letter was unfinished. "Dear M, I have begun to wonder whether the fall is not the scandal of the system, but its mercy." There the letter stopped. No signature, no date, only a blank lower half of the page. Mira sat very still. The fall is mercy. That was not orthodox Gnostic teaching in any clean sense. It was Eleanor's interpretation. Perhaps too poetic, perhaps too personal. But it had force. If Sophia had never fallen, the lower world would never have received the spark. If wisdom had never descended, human beings would have remained only clay. If the light had never entered the place of forgetting, there would be nothing within us to awaken. Mira felt the old myth shifting. Sophia was not simply the one who caused the wound. She was also the reason the wound could become a doorway. The clerk appeared at the end of the table. "We close in 20 minutes. Mira nodded. She photographed what she was allowed to photograph, copied what she could not. Then, near the bottom of the second box, she found a sealed envelope. It was not officially sealed, only folded shut with a brittle strip of tape that had long since lost its strength. On the front, Eleanor had written, "For the chapter I could not publish." Inside were 5 pages, no title, no date. The first line read, "There is a second Sophia in every reader." Mira felt the room narrow. She read on, not the aeon of the myth, not the doctrinal figure, not the cosmological principle. A second Sophia, the part of the mind that longs beyond the permitted boundary, the part that makes mistakes because obedience alone cannot satisfy it, the part that falls into the world and then discovers, to its horror and wonder, that it has carried light with it. Mira's throat tightened. She did not know whether Eleanor Voss had been brilliant, unstable, lonely, or simply tired. Maybe all of them. But she understood why the chapter had not been published. It was not improper. Not exactly. It was too intimate. Scholarship allows passion, but only after it has been properly dressed. Eleanor had left the wound visible. Mira folded the pages back into the envelope. For a moment she considered leaving them there, returning to her proper research, writing the defensible chapter. Sophia as threshold figure, Sophia as feminine wisdom, Sophia as mythic cause of cosmic rupture, clean, safe, acceptable. Then she copied the first line into her notebook. There is a second Sophia in every reader. And beneath it, without planning to, she wrote, "Then what is falling in me?" That night, Mira did not dream of the Pleroma. She dreamed of the lower heavens. She stood beneath a sky made of rings, 7 vast circles, turning slowly above the world. Each ring carried a different light, not the soft light of stars, a colder light, administrative, watchful, as though the heavens were not windows into infinity, but mechanisms, gates, systems, boundaries. Between the rings moved shapes, the Archons, not demons exactly, not monsters in the simple sense. They were too orderly for that. They resembled officials of the cosmos, powers with faces like masks, some animal, some human, some geometric, some impossible to hold in memory. They did not rage, they processed, they recorded, they measured, they assigned, they guarded the borders between one realm and another. Each one seemed to carry a law. You may go this far. You may know this much. You may rise only with permission. Below them, the world turned. Cities appeared and vanished. Empires rose. Kings placed crowns on their own heads and called it divine order. Priests spoke beneath painted ceilings. Soldiers carried standards. Merchants weighed silver. Mothers washed children. Old women lit lamps. Bodies aged. Fields dried. Ships crossed black water. Everywhere human beings looked upward. Some in prayer, some in fear, some in longing. Most did not know what they were looking for. Mira walked through the dream unnoticed. The Archons did not stop her, perhaps because she was not fully there, perhaps because dreams have their own permissions. At the center of the turning heavens, she saw a throne. Upon it sat the Demiurge, Yaldabaoth. Again he would not hold one shape. A lion-faced ruler, a blind artisan, a child king, a craftsman bent over unfinished matter, a radiant tyrant wrapped in borrowed light. He was terrifying, but also pitiful. That surprised Mira. She had expected hatred. Instead, she felt the sorrow of power without self-knowledge. The Demiurge was not simply cruel. He was mistaken at the root of himself. He believed his loneliness was uniqueness. He believed his ignorance was omniscience. He believed his distance from the higher light meant there was no higher light. Around him, the Archons repeated his certainty. There is no realm above. There is no source beyond. There is no light except what we permit. There is no self beyond the body. There is no freedom beyond obedience. There is no memory before birth. There is no home beyond the world. Their voices did not sound like thunder. They sounded like ordinary thoughts. That was what frightened Mira most. The Archons did not need chains if they could become assumptions. You are only what you own. You are only what others approve. You are only your fear. You are only your wound. You are only your role. You are only clay. The dream shifted. Mira stood in a garden. Not Eden as children imagine it. No soft innocence. No golden haze. This garden was enclosed. Beautiful, but enclosed. Every tree had been named, every path measured, every fruit permitted or forbidden. In the centre grew a tree whose leaves moved without wind. At its roots a serpent watched. Mira understood the old reversal. In many ordinary readings, the serpent is the enemy, the deceiver, the one who ruins paradise. But in some Gnostic traditions, the garden is not paradise. It is a controlled place, a bright enclosure inside a lesser world, and the serpent is not merely temptation. The serpent is a whisper from beyond the system, a reminder that human beings were not made only for obedience. The serpent looked at Mira. Its eyes were not cruel, they were ancient, tired, almost compassionate. It spoke without moving its mouth. They told you knowledge was the wound, but knowledge is how the wound learns its name. At the far end of the garden, Adam and Eve stood beneath the trees, not guilty, not ashamed yet, still unfinished, still wrapped in the Demiurge's sleep. The rulers had shaped them, the breath had moved in them, but the spark inside them remained dim, like an ember buried under ash. The serpent moved toward the tree. Above, the Archons stirred. The rings of heaven tightened. A voice from the lower sky commanded, "Do not awaken." But another voice, softer, deeper, threaded through the leaves. Sophia, not appearing as a woman, not descending in form, only present as a pressure of tenderness inside the air. The serpent lifted its head. The fruit was taken. The world held its breath. Then the human eyes opened. Not all the way, not into perfect knowledge, not into freedom without pain, but enough. Enough to know they were naked. Enough to know they were vulnerable. Enough to know the garden was not the whole of reality. Enough to begin suffering consciously. That was the terrible gift. Before knowledge, there is pain without understanding. After knowledge, there is pain with memory. Mira watched Eve touch her own chest, as if feeling something there for the first time. A warmth, a question, a light. The Demiurge's voice moved through the garden. "Where are you?" The question sounded like accusation, but in the dream, Mira heard another meaning beneath it. Where are you? Not because God did not know, but because the human being had become capable of answering. I am here. I am afraid. I am awake. The garden dissolved. Mira was back beneath the turning heavens. The Archons moved restlessly. Something had entered the system that could not be fully governed. A memory. A spark. A question. From somewhere beyond the ring, Sophia's grief became almost beautiful. Because grief, when it refuses despair, becomes care. She could not undo the lower world. She could not simply dissolve the Demiurge. She could not tear the sparks upward by force. Awakening could not be forced. Knowledge had to be recognized. So Sophia remained near the boundary, calling, not loudly, not with command, but through symbols, through dreams, through longing, through sudden discomfort with falsehood, through the strange ache that comes when a person looks at the world and thinks, "This cannot be all." Mira woke in darkness. No rain now, only the hum of the building. She reached for the notebook beside her bed and wrote without turning on the lamp. The Archons are most powerful when they sound like common sense. In the morning, she could barely read the sentence, but she knew it mattered. Mira began to notice how often the old myth used descent. Not merely fall, descent, light descends. Wisdom descends, the revealer descends, the soul descends into the world. The human being, in some Gnostic texts, does not simply belong to earth. Something in the human being has come from elsewhere. Something has crossed a boundary. That idea could become dangerous if handled carelessly. It could become contempt for the body, contempt for ordinary life, contempt for work, food, children, love, weather, illness, animals, the slow tenderness of being alive. Mira knew that some ancient movements did speak harshly about matter. Some saw the body as a prison. Some treated the world as a trap. But as she read Sophia, as she read Eleanor Voss, as she returned again and again to the image of wisdom grieving near the edge of the lower world, she felt the myth asking for more subtlety. What if the world was not hated? What if it was mourned? There is a difference. Hatred wants destruction. Mourning wants restoration. Hatred says the world has no value. Mourning says the world has forgotten its value. That distinction became the center of Mira's work. She wrote it on a card and pinned it above her desk. Not hatred of matter, grief over matter without memory. For several weeks her life narrowed. Library, apartment, archive notes, dreams, seminars, coffee, rain, photocopies, more rain. Sophia began to appear everywhere, though Mira tried not to admit this. In a line from Proverbs, where wisdom stands at the crossroads, in a damaged Coptic phrase about the mother, in a Valentinian account where deficiency becomes the origin of the lower world, in the strange feminine voice of the thunder perfect mind, declaring herself both honoured and despised, knowledge and ignorance, strength and fear. The texts did not all agree. That was part of their power. They formed no simple system. They were more like fragments of a broken mirror, each piece catching a different angle of the same hidden light. Mira returned to Eleanor's papers twice, then a third time. The archive clerk stopped asking her what she wanted. He simply brought the boxes. On the third visit, Mira found a small bundle she had missed before. It had slipped behind a folder of lecture drafts, 3 pages, folded together, with a paperclip rusted at the edge. At the top, Eleanor had written, "The second Sophia is not a doctrine." Below that, "She is a readerly event." Mira frowned. Readerly event. The phrase was ugly, academic in the worst way, but the notes beneath it were not. When the myth is read correctly, Eleanor wrote, the reader becomes the site of repetition. Sophia's movement is recapitulated inwardly. The reader reaches beyond permitted knowledge. The reader discovers a lower creator. The reader recognizes bondage. The reader finds the spark. The reader becomes both the fallen one and the one called home. Mira sat back. Outside the archive window, a bare tree moved slightly in the wind. The idea was not that Sophia was only psychological, not merely a symbol inside the mind. That would flatten the myth. Ancient people were not simply writing modern psychology in costume, they were building cosmologies. Sacred maps, stories of heaven, creation, salvation, and power. But myth does not remain outside the reader. It enters. If the story is strong enough, the reader begins to move inside its architecture. The Pleroma becomes not only a divine realm, but a memory of wholeness. The Demiurge becomes not only a cosmic craftsman, but every false authority that mistakes control for truth. The Archons become not only rulers of the heavens, but the voices that keep the soul obedient to fear. The spark becomes not only an ancient doctrine, but the part of a person that refuses to believe they are only what the world has named them. And Sophia becomes the ache that begins the search. Mira copied the passage carefully. Then she found a final note at the bottom of the 3rd page. Ask why the myth begins with wisdom, not ignorance. She underlined it. Ask why the myth begins with wisdom, not ignorance. That was the key. Gnosticism is often described as a religion of escape. Escape from matter, escape from the body, escape from the world. But the Sophia myth does not begin with matter. It does not begin with the Demiurge. It does not begin with evil. It begins inside the fullness. It begins with wisdom, with light, with longing. The tragedy is not that darkness exists. The tragedy is that light can become separated from its source. Mira returned home after dark. The city was wet and reflective. Street lamps shimmered on the pavement. People moved past her with bags, umbrellas, phones, private worries. For a moment she imagined each of them carrying a spark, hidden, unannounced, buried under rent, messages, tiredness, illness, ambition, memory, resentment, love, not glowing visibly, not magical, just present. The old Gnostics had looked at human beings and seen something impossible, clay with light inside, bodies that could suffer, decay, be frightened, be controlled, and yet somehow carry an element older than the stars. Mira stopped at a crossing. Traffic moved through the rain. Above the buildings, the clouds hung low. The world was not false in the simple sense. It was too painful to be dismissed as illusion, too beautiful to be dismissed as a mistake. Maybe that was why Sophia grieved. Because the world was worth saving. Because even flawed creation contained traces of the fullness. Because every fragment, however buried, still belonged to the light. The signal changed. Mira crossed the street. That night, for the first time in weeks, she did not dream. She slept deeply, and somewhere beneath sleep, without images, without words, she felt the silence of the Pleroma not as distance, but as something listening. In the weeks that followed, Mira began reading the Pistis Sophia at night. Not because it was simple. It was not. The text was long, layered, repetitive, strange. It belonged to a different world of imagination than the clean diagrams people sometimes use to explain Gnosticism. There were realms of light, treasuries, powers, mysteries, repentances, hymns, questions asked by disciples, answers given by the risen Christ. And there, again, Sophia suffered, not exactly as in the earlier myths, not exactly as the final aeon whose error gave rise to the Demiurge, but as a figure who has fallen from her place, who longs for the light, who is oppressed by hostile powers, who sings repentance after repentance, who cries upward until help comes. Mira did not try to merge all the versions. That was the mistake beginners made. They wanted one Gnostic Bible, one official chart, one story, one neat sequence, but the ancient material resisted that. Gnosticism was not a single room. It was a city of locked rooms, half-collapsed corridors, shared symbols, borrowed names, rival schools, visionary texts, and luminous contradictions. Sophia moved through that city like a recurring melody, always changing, always recognizable. In Pistis Sophia, what struck Mira most was not the cosmology, it was the repetition. Sophia cries, Sophia repents, Sophia asks. Sophia is answered, but not all at once. Her restoration is slow, painfully slow. The help she receives does not erase the descent immediately. She must speak from within it. Again, again, again. Mira found that strangely comforting. Most stories of awakening are too fast. A door opens, a veil lifts, a secret is revealed, the seeker becomes free. But real awakening, and if it happens at all, is rarely clean. People understand something, then forget it. They leave a prison, then rebuild it in another form. They reject one false authority, then submit to a subtler one. They glimpse the spark, then spend years learning how not to bury it again. Sophia's hymns understood this. Longing returns, fear returns, hope returns. The cry upward must be repeated. One night, near midnight, Mira read until the words blurred. Her desk lamp cast a small circle of yellow light. Beyond it, her apartment was dark. The city outside had gone quiet in the way cities never fully do. A bus exhaled at a stop. A distant siren rose, then faded. Somewhere above her, a neighbour walked across a wooden floor. Mira read a passage in which Sophia, surrounded by hostile powers, remembers the light. That was the important word. Remembers. She does not create the light. She does not invent it. She does not argue herself into it. She remembers. Memory, in the Gnostic imagination, is not nostalgia. It is salvation. To remember is to recover origin. To remember is to know that the rulers of the lower world are not ultimate. To remember is to feel, however faintly, that the self is older than the names placed upon it. Mira closed the book. The room seemed very still. She thought of Eleanor Voss, of the unpublished chapter, of Professor Vale's warning, of the second Sophia in every reader. She thought of her own life, not dramatically, not as tragedy, just the ordinary life of a person trying to become someone respectable, competent, legible. How many names had she accepted because they made the world easier? Student, researcher, daughter. Difficult, promising, too intense, not serious enough. Too serious. Spiritual but not religious. Academic but too poetic. She wondered how many of those names were Archons in miniature. Not evil, not false entirely, but limiting. Each one a small ruler saying, "This far, no further." She opened her notebook and wrote, "The Archons do not always lie. Sometimes they tell partial truths, until the soul mistakes them for the whole." Then she wrote, "Gnosis is not rejecting every name. It is remembering that no name is final." The sentence felt clean. She kept it. Near 1 a.m, she fell asleep at the desk. This time, the dream began in darkness. Not the luminous darkness before creation. Not the ringed heavens of the Archons. A human darkness. Stone. Damp air. A narrow passage. Mira was walking underground. In her hand, she carried a small lamp. The flame was blue. Ahead of her, someone was singing. A woman's voice. Low. Not sad exactly. Older than sadness. The passage walls were covered in writing, but not in any script Mira knew. The marks changed as the lamp passed over them. Letters became birds. Birds became eyes. Eyes became stars. Stars became seeds. The song continued. Mira followed it deeper. At last, the passage opened into a chamber. In the centre stood a figure robed in darkness. Not black cloth. Darkness itself, folded like fabric. Where the face should have been, there was a soft brightness. Not enough to see by. Enough to know someone was there. Mira understood. Sophia, the fallen wisdom, the mother of longing, the keeper of the spark. Mira wanted to ask a question. Which version are you? The Aeon, the world soul, the repentant figure of Pistis Sophia, the wisdom of Proverbs, the second Sophia inside the reader? But the question dissolved before she spoke it. Sophia lifted one hand. The chamber changed. Mira saw countless people sleeping, not in beds, in streets, in offices, in temples, in palaces, in prisons, in classrooms, in bedrooms lit by phone screens, in hospitals, in trains, in houses full of noise. Each sleeper had a small light inside the chest. Some lights burned clearly, some were almost hidden. Some flickered beneath layers of grief, fear, habit, or exhaustion. Around them moved the Archons. Again, not always monstrous. Some looked like rulers, some like judges, some like advertisements. some like family expectations, some like respectable opinions, some like despair, some like the voice that says, "This is just how things are." Sophia moved among the sleepers without waking them by force. She only touched the air near them. A dream here, a question there, a book falling open, a sentence remembered, a sudden refusal, a grief that would not become bitterness, a beauty that made someone pause, a love that made control unbearable. One by one, some of the lights stirred, not waking fully, not yet, only brightening. Mira watched and understood why Sophia's work was slow. The spark could not be commanded awake. It had to recognize the call as its own. Then Sophia turned toward her. This time she spoke, not in Coptic, not in Greek, not in any language Mira knew, but Mira understood. You are not saved by escaping the world. You are saved from believing the world is complete. The chamber faded. The underground passage dissolved. Mira woke with her cheek against the open book. The lamp still burned. Her neck ached. The city outside had entered the deep quiet before dawn. She wrote the sentence immediately. You are not saved by escaping the world. You are saved from believing the world is complete. Then, beneath it, she added, Sophia does not open a door out of reality. She opens a window inside it. By spring, Mira's chapter had become something else. Not less scholarly, more. The bones were stronger now. She had learned to separate the threads. The Sophia of the secret book of John. The Sophia of Valentinian systems. The suffering figure of Pistis Sophia. The wisdom traditions that came before Gnosticism. The later interpretations that came after. The clean argument. The disputed evidence. The mythic retelling. The poetic resonance. Each needed its own place. Each needed a boundary. Professor Vale was right about that. Without boundaries, everything became fog, but too many boundaries created another danger. The living myth became pinned beneath glass. A specimen, labelled, explained, dead. Mira began to understand that her task was not to choose between scholarship and wonder. It was to let each correct the other. Wonder without discipline becomes fantasy. Discipline without wonder becomes a locked room. Sophia required both. A lamp and a knife, a listening heart and a careful hand. She worked slowly. Some mornings she wrote only a paragraph, some evenings only a sentence. But the argument gathered itself. She wrote that Sophia's fall could be read on several levels at once. Cosmological, as a myth about how the lower world came into being. Theological, as a story about divine fullness, deficiency and restoration. Anthropological, as an account of why human beings feel divided between flesh and spirit. Psychological, as an image of longing, error, grief, and return. Political, as a warning against powers that declare themselves ultimate because they cannot see beyond themselves. But beneath all of these, she began to see another level, existential. Sophia names the condition of being conscious in a damaged world. To be human, in the Gnostic imagination, is to awaken inside a system that tries to define you before you can remember yourself. A body names you, a family names you, a city names you, a class, a gender, a fear, a wound, a profession, a nation, a religion, a failure, a desire. Some names are gifts, some are cages, most are both. The spark inside the human being does not mean the body is worthless. It means no outer name can exhaust the truth of the soul. Mira placed that sentence near the center of the chapter. No outer name can exhaust the truth of the soul. Then she stopped. It was too broad, too beautiful, too likely to be quoted by exactly the wrong sort of person. She almost deleted it. Instead, she revised the paragraph around it until the sentence could stand without pretending to prove more than it proved. That was the work, not killing beauty, teaching it how to behave. One afternoon, while checking a reference in Eleanor Voss's correspondence, Mira noticed something she had missed. The unnamed colleague in the letters had always been addressed as E.M. Dear M, you say I am romanticizing exile. I understand your objection. Dear M, I have begun to wonder whether the fall is not the scandal of the system, but its mercy. Mira had assumed M was a colleague, a person, but in a later folder, inside notes on Pistis Sophia, Eleanor had copied the same salutation at the top of several pages that were not letters. Dear M, then prayers, fragments, questions, notes addressed to no obvious recipient. Dear M, if wisdom descends, what remains above? Dear M, why does light become more visible in darkness? Is memory a form of grace? Mira stared at the page. M was not necessarily a person. M might have been a private device, an address to the myth itself. Mother, memory, mystery, monad. Or Mira thought and then stopped herself. No, that was too easy, too novelistic, too much like the universe arranging itself for her benefit. She closed the folder, then opened it again. On the back of one page, Eleanor had written a single line. Every reader supplies the missing name. Mira laughed softly in the archive. Not because it was funny, because it was precise. Every reader supplies the missing name. That was how Sophia worked. A myth gives enough shape to hold many lives. Not because it means anything one wants it to mean. That would make it useless. But because the pattern is deep enough that different people enter through different wounds. For one person, Sophia is intellectual pride, the mind trying to know what cannot be known. For another, she is divine compassion, wisdom entering darkness to rescue what was lost. For another, she is exile. For another, feminine sacred presence in a world that forgot how to name it. For another, the soul itself. For another, the danger of creating without relation. For another, the hope that even error can be gathered back into fullness. Every reader supplies the missing name. Mira copied the sentence. Then she added beneath it, but the myth supplies the wound. That evening, she walked home through a city full of early spring rain. The trees along the avenue had begun to loosen their first leaves, barely green, almost invisible unless one looked closely. The world was quietly returning to itself. In shop windows, lamps glowed. A child pressed both hands against the glass of a bakery. A man argued into his phone beside a bus stop. A woman in a red coat stood under an awning, eyes closed, face lifted toward the rain as if receiving a blessing she would not explain. Mira slowed. For a moment, the Gnostic world overlaid the ordinary one, not replacing it, revealing it. The bakery became not a prison, but a place where light had taken the form of bread. The argument at the bus stop became not merely irritation, but the ache of a creature who did not know what he was truly asking for. The woman under the awning became a figure at the edge of the Pleroma, receiving something from beyond the weather. It would be dangerous to live like that all the time. The mind would break under the pressure of too much meaning. But occasionally, briefly, the world allowed itself to be seen as symbol. Not less real. More. Mira thought again of the Demiurge, the blind creator, the ruler of the lower world. How easy it would be to hate him. How satisfying to blame all heaviness on a cosmic tyrant, to say, this is not my fault. The world was made wrong. The rulers are false. I belong elsewhere. But that was not enough. It was too simple. Even the Demiurge, in the deepest reading, was not pure evil. He was ignorance enthroned, power without memory, creation without humility, authority without origin. That made him more disturbing, because the Demiurge was not only out there, he appeared wherever a person mistook their partial vision for the whole. Wherever a system forgot it was a system, wherever a ruler forgot he was not God, wherever a scholar forgot the text was more than her argument, wherever a wounded person forgot their pain was not the measure of reality. Mira stopped beneath a street lamp. Rain gathered on her notebook. She wrote quickly before the thought escaped. The Demiurge is what the mind becomes when it cannot imagine anything above itself. She closed the notebook. The line felt true, not complete, but true enough to keep. That night she dreamed of no figures, no Sophia, no Archons, no shining Pleroma, only a door, plain, wooden, unmarked, standing in the middle of an empty field. The field was grey beneath a dawn sky. Mira approached the door, but did not open it. There was no handle, only a keyhole. From the other side, a soft light moved, not blazing, not urgent, waiting. Mira understood that the door was not locked from the other side. It was locked from hers. When she woke, she knew the chapter had found its question. Not, what is Sophia? Not, was the Gnostic myth true? Not, did the ancient writers believe the world was evil? The deeper question was quieter. What part of us is still locked from our own side? The day of Mira's presentation arrived with clear weather. No rain. For the first time in weeks, sunlight entered the department windows and made the old building look almost kind. The seminar room was small, 12 people, maybe 15. A few faculty members, several graduate students, 2 visiting scholars. Professor Vale sat near the back with a notebook on his knee. Mira placed her papers on the lectern and waited for her hands to stop trembling. They did not, so she began anyway. She did not open dramatically. No talk of forbidden wisdom, no claim that history had been hidden by sinister powers, no theatrical whisper about lost truths. She began carefully. Sophia, she said, is not one figure with one meaning across all Gnostic texts. She is a cluster of related traditions, a name through which ancient authors explored divine wisdom, cosmic rupture, human exile, and the possibility of return. She spoke of the Pleroma, the fullness, of aeons and syzygies, of emanation, of the final aeon whose desire, in some accounts, creates instability. She explained the Demiurge, not as the devil in a simple sense, but as a lower creator, ignorant of the higher source. She explained the Archons, the rulers, the powers, the cosmic administrators of a flawed order. She explained the spark, the element of higher light hidden in humanity. She explained Gnosis, not as secret information, but as awakening, recognition, knowledge that changes the knower. She quoted no long passages. She avoided decoration. The room listened. Then, after the factual structure was built, she moved gently toward interpretation. The Sophia myth, she said, is often described as a story of fall. And it is. But fall is not the only movement in the myth. There is also descent. There is also transmission. There is also the strange mercy by which light enters the place of forgetfulness. She felt Vale look up. She continued. If Sophia remains untouched within the fullness, the lower world is abandoned to ignorance. But if Sophia descends, even through error, even through suffering, then something of the fullness enters the world. The result is tragic, but not hopeless. Matter becomes the site of captivity, yes, but also the hiding place of light. Humanity becomes vulnerable to archonic rule, yes, but also capable of awakening. The world becomes wounded, but the wound contains memory. No one moved. Mira's fear settled, not vanished, settled. She no longer tried to convince the room. She only tried to tell the truth as carefully as she could. She spoke of Eleanor Voss then, not as a prophet, not as a suppressed genius, as a scholar whose unpublished notes had pressed toward a question. Whether Sophia's fall could be read not merely as failure, but as the mythic condition for redemption. Mira used that word cautiously. Redemption. Not as a solved doctrine, as a movement. From ignorance toward memory, from isolation toward relation, from false rule toward inner recognition. She ended with the line from Vale's margin, though she did not say where it came from. Sophia should not become an escape from the world. She may be the reason to return to it differently. Then she stopped. There was a silence. The ordinary academic kind at first, people checking notes, preparing questions, deciding whether to be generous. Then one of the visiting scholars raised her hand. She was older, with silver hair and very bright eyes. You are careful to distinguish mythic interpretation from historical claim, she said. Good. Mira nodded, waiting for the correction. The scholar continued. But I wonder if you are still too gentle with the darker side of the tradition. Some Gnostic texts do express profound alienation from the body and the world. Is there a risk that your reading softens that into something modern readers prefer? Mira had expected this question. She was grateful for it. Yes, she said, there is that risk. Some ancient texts do speak with real hostility toward the material realm. We should not domesticate that. The myth can be severe, even world-denying, but severity is not the whole tradition. And even where the world is treated as a place of captivity, the presence of the spark complicates contempt. Because what is trapped is precious. A prison that contains light cannot be discussed as if nothing inside it matters. The scholar smiled slightly. A good answer, not a complete answer, but good. Another hand rose. A doctoral student asked whether Sophia's story could be compared with Eve. Another asked about wisdom in Proverbs. Another asked about whether the Demiurge should be seen as a parody of the biblical creator. Professor Vale asked nothing. He only wrote. At the end, as people gathered bags and coats, the older visiting scholar approached Mira. Your Eleanor Voss material is interesting, she said. Be careful with it. Mira almost smiled. Everyone says that, because everyone is right. Then the scholar lowered her voice. But do not remove it. Why? Because the dead also participate in scholarship. Mira looked at her. The scholar continued. We pretend they do not. We pretend we are only dealing with texts. But half our work is listening to people who could not finish speaking. She touched Mira's arm briefly and left. The room emptied. Vale remained near the back. Mira gathered her papers slowly. When she reached him, he handed her the notebook page he had been writing on. Only one sentence was there. You found the door, but did not force it open. Mira read it. She looked at him. Is that good? Usually, he said. Then he put on his coat and left. Mira stood alone in the seminar room. Sunlight had shifted across the table. Dust moved visibly in the air. The presentation was over. Nothing dramatic had happened. No revelation in the obvious sense. No secret manuscript discovered at the final moment. No institution exposed. No ancient order unmasked. Only a room, a conversation, a few careful questions, and a myth that had survived by becoming readable again. Yet Mira felt something had changed. Not in the world, in her relation to it. She understood then that the Sophia story did not offer escape, at least not the kind she had once imagined. It did not say, "The world is false, so leave it." It said something more difficult. The world is incomplete. Remember what it lacks. The rulers are not ultimate. Do not give them your soul. You are not only clay. Do not despise the clay. The spark is hidden. Live as if it can be recognized. Wisdom has fallen. Listen for where she is calling. This was the soft revelation. Not a doctrine, not a proof. Not a final answer to Gnosticism. A change in hearing. The same world remained. The same body. The same bills. The same griefs. The same institutions. The same rain when rain returned. But behind them, or within them, or beneath them, there was another register. A low note, a memory, a light under ash. Mira placed her papers into her bag. As she turned off the seminar room lights, she thought of Sophia at the edge of the Pleroma, no longer only fallen, no longer only guilty, no longer only grieving. Sophia as the part of wisdom willing to enter the place that has forgotten wisdom, not because darkness is good, not because suffering is noble, but because what is lost cannot be called home from a distance forever. Someone or something must come near enough to whisper. Mira's dissertation was finished 9 months later. Not perfect. No dissertation is, but complete, bound, submitted, defended, revised, accepted. The world did not transform. That disappointed her slightly, though she would not have admitted it. The day after acceptance, she woke in her apartment to sunlight on the floor and a dull headache. There were dishes in the sink, laundry in a chair, unread emails, a message from her mother asking whether she was eating properly, a message from Vale saying simply, "Well done," a message from the archive clerk, unexpectedly, telling her that another folder from the Voss papers had been located during reclassification. Mira stared at the screen. Of course, she thought, the archive never opens everything at once. She almost laughed. Then she made coffee. The new folder arrived digitally 2 weeks later. Scanned pages, poor resolution, mostly administrative material, an old lecture schedule, a grant rejection, notes for a course on wisdom traditions, a receipt for train travel, and at the end, one handwritten page, no title, only a paragraph. Mira recognized Eleanor's hand immediately. The Sophia myth will always be misunderstood by those who need it to be either hatred of the world or comfort inside the world. It is neither. It is the wound made articulate. It says, "You are right to feel estranged, but wrong to think estrangement is the end." It says, "The world is broken, but not empty." It says, "The rulers are real, but not final." It says, "What fell into matter was not only error, but light." Mira read the paragraph many times. There was no hidden secret in it, no historical bombshell, no proof of anything, only clarity, the kind that arrives after a person has spent years circling the same flame. She printed the page and placed it in a folder. Then, after a long hesitation, she opened her own manuscript and added the paragraph as an epigraph to the final chapter. Vale objected at first. Too much, he wrote in the margin. Then, 2 days later, he sent another message. Keep it. That was all. Years passed. Not many. Enough. Mira became Dr. Mira Elian, a lecturer first, then a professor. She wrote articles with careful titles. She taught late antique religion to students who came into the room carrying their own hidden wars. Some were bored, some brilliant, some fragile, some arrogant. some hungry for exactly the kind of secret knowledge Vale had warned her about. She learned to teach Gnosticism with both doors open, one door toward history, the other toward meaning. She told students that Gnosticism was not one thing, that the term itself was debated, that ancient texts should not be flattened into modern spirituality. That suspicion of the world can become wisdom or poison, depending on what it does to the heart. She told them that the Demiurge was not a toy for people who wanted to feel superior, that Archons were not an excuse to dehumanize those who disagreed with you, that gnosis was not a weapon, that remembering should make a person gentler. Some students listened, some did not. That was always the way. Occasionally, after class, someone would stay behind. They would ask about Sophia, not always directly. Sometimes they asked whether ancient people really believed the world was a prison. Sometimes they asked whether the divine spark was metaphor. Sometimes they asked why the story made them sad. Mira learned not to answer too quickly. She would say, "What part made you sad?" Often the student did not know, or did know but could not say. So Mira would wait. That, too, was part of the work. Years after her defense, Mira visited the archive again. The theological college had changed. New paint, new security system, a cafe where the old reception desk had been. The churchyard outside was the same, or nearly. The stones a little softer, the grass a little wilder. The archive clerk had retired. A younger archivist brought the Voss boxes. Mira opened them with the tenderness one brings to old correspondence from the dead. The papers were as she remembered, fragile, difficult, unfinished. She found the envelope again. For the chapter I could not publish. The tape had been removed now, the pages placed in proper sleeves, preserved, catalogued, visible to whoever knew to ask. Mira felt unexpectedly relieved, not because Eleanor had been proven right. She had not. Not because the world had recognized her. It mostly had not. But because something once nearly lost had been given a place to remain. Perhaps that is all archives can promise. Not resurrection, not justice, a place to remain. Before leaving, Mira asked to see the old printed edition where she had first found the marginal note. The book was brought out on a foam support. Its cover faded, its pages yellowed. There, still in the margin, the pencil sentence remained. Not all falls are punishments. Some are descents of wisdom. Mira looked at it for a long time. She no longer needed to know whether Eleanor had written it. Perhaps she had. Perhaps someone else. Perhaps the sentence had passed through several hands before settling there. It no longer mattered. Every reader supplies the missing name. Outside, evening gathered. The archive lights hummed softly. Mira closed the book. As she walked back through the town toward the station, bells began to ring from the old church. The sound moved over the stones, the roofs, the wet streets, the small shops, the passing cars. A very ordinary sound, a lower world sound, metal struck by human hands, air trembling, time measured. And yet, for a moment, Mira heard it as Sophia might hear it. Not pure, not perfect, not free of history, power, grief, or contradiction, but carrying something. A vibration, a call, a reminder that even matter can be made to sing. The train station was nearly empty. Mira sat on a bench beneath harsh lights, waiting. Across the platform, a child slept against his father's coat. An old woman read a newspaper. A man in a dark suit stared at nothing, each one enclosed in a private world, each one carrying perhaps some hidden ember. Mira did not romanticize them. She knew better now. Human beings were not secretly pure. They could be cruel, petty, cowardly, violent, asleep in ways they chose. The spark did not erase the clay, but neither did the clay erase the spark. That was the difficult dignity of the human condition. The train arrived. Doors opened. People entered. Mira found a seat by the window. As the town slid away into dusk, she thought of the Pleroma, not as a place above the clouds, not as a lost homeland one could map, but as the name for a wholeness the soul somehow recognizes before it can explain. She thought of Sophia, still at the threshold, still calling, still grieving, still wise, still fallen, perhaps, or perhaps not fallen, perhaps only near enough that the lowest world has never been entirely without her. Years later, Mira would sometimes be asked whether she believed the myth. It was a simple question only to people who had not spent enough time with myths. Did she believe Sophia truly existed? Did she believe the Demiurge made the world? Did she believe the Archons ruled the lower heavens? Did she believe a spark of divine light was hidden inside human beings? Mira never answered quickly. She had learned that quick answers usually served the person asking more than the truth. If she said yes, they would place her in one box. Mystic, believer, unreliable. If she said no, they would place her in another. Scholar, skeptic, safe. But the story of Sophia did not fit easily into either. So she would say, "I believe the myth knows something." That was usually enough to make the room quiet. Not because it solved anything, because it refused to solve too quickly. The myth knows something. It knows that human beings often feel estranged from the world they live in. It knows that power, when it forgets what is above it, becomes blind. It knows that systems can become prisons while still calling themselves order. It knows that knowledge can wound before it heals. It knows that longing can lead to error. It knows that error can become a path. It knows that grief, if it remains open, can become care. And it knows that some part of the human being seems to remember a fullness it has never seen with ordinary eyes. Mira did not preach this. She did not build a doctrine from it. She knew the danger of certainty. She knew how easily hidden knowledge becomes another throne, another demiurge, another little ruler declaring, "I alone understand. There is no one above me." So she taught Sophia gently, as one teaches fire, useful, beautiful, dangerous, not to be held carelessly. In her lectures, she would draw 3 circles on the board. The first, large and open, she called the Pleroma, the fullness, the realm of divine wholeness. The second, smaller and lower, she called the Canoma, the emptiness, the region of lack, where the Demiurge and the Archons shape the visible cosmos. The third, inside the lower circle, she marked with a small point, the spark. A student would always ask, "Is the spark the soul?" Mira would pause. In some systems, yes, or close to it, but not the soul in the ordinary sentimental sense, not personality, not mood, not preference, not the story you tell about yourself. The spark is deeper. It is the element in the human being that belongs to the higher reality, the part capable of gnosis, the part that can recognize the call. Then another student would ask, "So the goal is to escape?" And Mira would say, "That depends what you mean by escape. If escape means hatred of life, then be careful. If escape means remembering that the world's powers are not ultimate, then perhaps. If escape means becoming less cruel, less asleep, less owned by fear, then perhaps. If escape means abandoning the suffering world because you believe you are too pure for it, then no, that is only another form of ignorance." The students would write this down, some earnestly, some mechanically, some not at all. Mira never knew which sentences would remain with them. Teachers rarely do. A person may forget the argument and remember only an image. A woman at the edge of the fullness, a blind creator in the dark, a serpent beneath a tree, a spark hidden in clay, a voice calling upward from below. That is how myths survive, not always through belief, sometimes through images that refuse to die. At night, and after teaching, Mira would sometimes walk home alone. The city had changed over the years. New buildings, new lights, new shops where old ones had closed. The world kept replacing itself while insisting it was the same world. She would pass apartment windows, each one containing a fragment of life. Someone cooking, someone arguing, someone watching television in blue light, someone standing motionless at a sink, someone dancing alone, someone holding a child, someone asleep on a sofa, mouth open, one hand fallen to the floor. And sometimes, without trying to, Mira would imagine Sophia moving through those rooms, not visibly, not as a ghost, not as a goddess descending in splendor, only as a tenderness near the places where people had forgotten themselves, near the woman who believed her grief was a private failure, near the man who mistook hardness for strength, near the child already learning which parts of herself to hide, near the old person who thought nothing remained to be revealed, near the restless, the ashamed, the ambitious, the frightened, the clever, the exhausted. Sophia did not remove the world from them. She did not dissolve rent, illness, loss, or time. She only kept whispering that these things were not the whole. Not the whole, not the whole. Sometimes that is enough to keep a spark alive. Once, after a lecture, a student waited until everyone else had left. He was quiet, thin, with tired eyes and a careful voice. He said, "I don't know why, but the story of Sophia makes me feel less ashamed." Mira looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Perhaps because it begins with a mistake and does not end there." The student nodded. He did not say anything else. He left the room. Mira remained behind, erasing the board. The circles faded under the cloth. Pleroma, Canoma, Spark, gone. Only chalk dust remained on her fingers. But even that, she thought, was not nothing. Powdered stone, white against skin. Matter remembering briefly that it could carry meaning. She washed her hands slowly. Outside, evening had settled. The first stars were hidden by city light, but she knew they were there. That, too, was a kind of faith, not seeing. Still knowing something remains above the glare. In some versions of the story, Sophia is restored. The light hears her repentance. Christ, or the Saviour, or the Logos, descends to help her. She is lifted. The deficiency is healed. The fullness receives back what had been disturbed. The cosmic wound begins to close. In other versions, the story is less simple. Sophia remains near the lower world, not fully inside it, not fully beyond it. A mother at the threshold, a light at the border, a voice between exile and home. Perhaps that is why she remains so powerful. Perfectly restored figures can become distant. They leave us too quickly, but Sophia lingers. She knows the ache from inside. She knows what it is to long wrongly, to reach too far, to make something that cannot be unmade, to grieve without being able to repair everything at once. She knows the lower world, not as the Demiurge knows it, through control, not as the Archons know it, through law, but through sorrow, through care, through the strange intimacy of having lost light into it. This makes Sophia different from a remote heavenly figure. She does not merely shine above the world, she haunts it with memory. A fallen wisdom is still wisdom. Wounded light is still light. A broken mirror can still catch the sun. For Midnight Archives, this is where the story becomes quiet, because we are not here to solve Gnosticism tonight. We are not here to decide which ancient school was correct. Not the Sethians, not the Valentinians, not the authors of Pistis Sophia, not the heresiologists who oppose them, not the modern interpreters who try to reconstruct them from fragments, hostile summaries, buried codices, and difficult translations. We are here with the image, Sophia standing at the edge of the fullness, the Demiurge, alone in the lower dark, believing himself supreme. The Archons, moving through the rings of the heavens, mistaking order for truth. The human being, made of clay but carrying a hidden spark. And somewhere inside that whole strange architecture, a question. What if the deepest part of us is not trying to become something new, but trying to remember what it already is? That is the Gnostic question. Not the only one, but one of the oldest. It does not always arrive as religion. Sometimes it arrives as dissatisfaction. Not ordinary dissatisfaction, the kind that wants a different room, a different city, a different face, and a different life. A deeper dissatisfaction. The feeling that no achievement will answer the oldest hunger. No praise, no possession, no title, no role, no system, no permission. Something in the person keeps asking, what was I before the world named me? That question can destroy a life if it is handled badly. It can make a person arrogant, detached, contemptuous, addicted to secrets, suspicious of everything ordinary. But handled gently, it can do something else. It can loosen false obedience. It can make power less hypnotic. It can make suffering less final. It can make beauty more serious. It can make another person's hiddenness easier to respect. Because if there is a spark in you, there may be one in everyone. Even those who are asleep, even those who annoy you, even those who have forgotten themselves so completely that they try to make others forget too. The spark is not moral superiority. It is responsibility. That is why remembering should make a person gentler. Mira returned to that sentence often. In lectures, in notebooks, in quiet moments when her own certainty became too sharp. Remembering should make a person gentler, not softer in the weak sense, not passive, not naive, gentler because arrogance belongs to the Demiurge, cruel certainty belongs to the lower rulers. The awakened soul, if it is truly awake, does not need to shout that it is awake. It listens differently. It sees the prison without becoming only hatred for the prison. It sees the clay without despising the body. It sees the Archons without forgetting compassion for those still caught inside their voices. It sees Sophia not only as fallen, but as faithful. Faithful to the sparks, faithful to the lost, faithful to the possibility that even here, in the lower world, something can still answer the light. Near the end of her life, Mira began writing a book that she never finished. Not an academic monograph. Not exactly. Not a memoir either. A series of meditations on ancient myths and modern loneliness. The first chapter was called The Mercy of the Fall. Only a fragment survives in her papers. A few pages, a title, some notes, a sentence copied from Eleanor Voss, a passage on Sophia, and then, near the end, this line: perhaps wisdom does not fall because she is foolish. Perhaps wisdom falls because only what descends can find what has been lost below. No one knows whether she meant that as theology, or poetry, or both. Maybe the distinction mattered less to her by then. The last page of the fragment contains no argument, only an image. Sophia walking through the lower world at night, not crowned, not radiant in any obvious way, barefoot, quiet, passing through cities, deserts, rooms, temples, hospitals, libraries, train stations, and dreams. Wherever she walks, small lights stir. Not all. Not many at once. Some continue sleeping. Some turn away. Some are frightened by the first feeling of recognition. But some remember. A little. Enough to become restless. Enough to ask the next question. Enough to know that the world they were given is not the whole of what is real. Sophia does not force them upward. She only walks on. The return does not hurry. The Pleroma, if it is truly fullness, does not panic. It waits with a patience older than time. The spark waits. The soul waits. The story waits. And perhaps on certain nights, when the mind is tired enough to stop defending itself, and the room is quiet enough, and the world has loosened its grip just slightly, one can feel it. Not a voice exactly, not a doctrine, not proof, only a faint inward motion, as if something hidden has turned toward home. So where does Sophia remain? In the old texts, yes. In Coptic pages, Greek fragments, hostile summaries, patient translations, scholarly disputes, and the strange survival of books buried in Egyptian earth. She remains in the names: Sophia, Achamoth, wisdom, the mother, the fallen Aeon, the one who repents, the one who remembers, the one who calls. She remains in the mythic architecture, the hidden god beyond all names, the Pleroma of living fullness, the Aeons in their luminous pairs, the disturbance at the edge, the blind creator below, the Archons in their turning heavens, the clay body, the sleeping human, the spark. She remains in the questions the myth leaves behind. Is the world broken by accident, by ignorance, by distance from its source? Are human beings merely products of the lower order, or do they carry something no lower power can fully own? Is knowledge dangerous because it destroys innocence, or because it reveals captivity? Is longing a flaw, or the soul remembering the direction of home? These questions do not need to be answered tonight, not fully. Some archives should not be emptied all at once. Over the next few weeks, we will continue opening the Gnostic archives. Slowly, carefully, we will move from Sophia to the Demiurge, from the Demiurge to the Archons, from the Archons to the divine spark, from the spark to the Pleroma, from the Pleroma to the lost Gospels, and from those lost Gospels to the old, unsettling question that still waits beneath so much of human life. Are we awake inside the world, or dreaming inside a system that taught us to call sleep reality? But for tonight, we stay with Sophia, wisdom at the threshold, the one who reached too far, the one who grieved, the one whose error became the hiding place of light. Perhaps that is why her story has endured, not because it is simple, it is not because it is comforting in an easy way. It is too strange for that, but because it speaks to a feeling many people know and rarely name, the feeling of being both here and not entirely here, of loving the world but not trusting its rulers, of needing the body but sensing that the self is more than the body, of wanting to belong while remembering some older belonging that no city, family, nation, career, or doctrine can fully replace. The Gnostics gave that feeling a cosmos. They built a whole invisible architecture around it, a fullness above, a flawed order below, rulers between, a spark inside, a wisdom who fell, a saviour who calls, a path of remembering. Whether one believes the myth literally, symbolically, poetically, or not at all, the image remains. A human being walking through the world, carrying a light they did not create and cannot entirely explain, a light covered by fear, by habit, by shame, by ambition, by obedience, by exhaustion, by the thousand small commands of the lower world, but not extinguished, never fully extinguished. The old texts would call this light pneuma, spirit, the breath of a higher reality. Mira called it memory. Eleanor called it the second Sophia. Others have called it conscience, soul, divine image, inner truth, grace, or simply the part of us that refuses to become only what hurt us. Names differ. The spark remains. Imagine it now. Not dramatically, not as fire bursting through the chest, only as a small warmth, a hidden ember, low and steady, somewhere beneath thought, somewhere beneath the day's noise, somewhere beneath everything you had to answer. Carry, finish, prove, explain, avoid, or endure. The ember does not ask anything from you tonight. It does not require belief. It does not require effort. It does not require you to solve the world before sleeping. It is enough to know that something in you remains unowned by the noise around you. Something quiet, something patient, something that still knows how to turn toward light. The Demiurge may declare himself supreme. The Archons may turn in their lower heavens. The world may continue with all its weight, its beauty, its confusion, its clocks, its bills, its weather, its losses, its sudden tenderness. But the spark remains, hidden, waiting, remembering. And Sophia, perhaps, is not far from it. Perhaps wisdom is closest not when life is clear, but when it is fractured. Perhaps she comes nearest to the tired mind, the restless heart, the one who has reached too far, fallen too low, lost too much, or wondered too long whether the mistake is the end of the story. It is not. In the myth of Sophia, the fall is not the end. The fall is where the search begins. And so, as the archive closes for the night, there is no need to climb the heavens, no need to defeat the rulers, no need to name every aeon, no need to understand every text. Let the Pleroma remain distant, let the stars remain veiled, let the old books rest in their cases, their pages quiet, their secrets folded into the dark. For now, only breathe, let the body become heavy, let the room soften around you, let the day fall away, piece by piece, like dust from an old manuscript. Somewhere beyond thought, the fullness remains full. Somewhere beneath fear, the spark remains bright. Somewhere at the edge of the lower world, Sophia waits. Not rushing, not commanding, only calling softly. Remember, remember, remember. If you are still awake, leave a quiet note below. Where in the world you are listening from, what time it is there, and which mystery you would like the archive to open next, but only if you feel like it. For tonight there is nothing more required, only the dark, only the slow breathing of the world around you, only the hidden light beneath the ash. This has been Midnight Archives. Sleep well, and may the unknown remain gentle with you.